Welcome to CLB's digital series, Where Are We Now? I am your host, Jocelyn Hunter, Senior Director of Communications here at CLB. Here we are at summer 2023. What has CLB been doing this year so far? To get us a picture of it, please join me in welcoming CLB's President and CEO, Tony Cancelosi. Tony, welcome back.
Well, thank you for having me, Jocelyn. And a lot of things have happened this year that so far that are pretty exciting, and things that started back in early November and December. One of the things that we really are trying to do is boost up employment for individuals that are visually impaired and blind. And so we teamed up with another agency, the Lighthouse in New Jersey, to train 8 of their individuals who are visually impaired and blind in digital data scanning. And we had a 2-week course. And at the end of the 2 weeks, we had another week of IT training, but we taught them how to scan documents. And it was pretty exciting because when they met up with our other team that's on the Army National Guard contract that is doing digital data scanning, they were very excited that they've learned a new application to go back to their agency and start looking at getting contracts to do digital data scanning. So we've created an environment for individuals to learn a specific thing that they can do well and fits right into our government contract strategy. So that was very significant, and we got that completed under a mentor-protege program. And now we have a dedicated training center in our Silver Spring office, which is really fantastic. New computers, new everything. And so we're off and running with that. The second thing is going through, in the beginning of this year, going through our advisory board and looking at some of the new people that we brought on to the advisory board, like Bob, who's going to be on our interview here today, is to bring on people who are going to give us the opportunity to expand our knowledge and awareness into the market, coming from where they are and from where they have come from in reference to their work experience. And so we've got a lot going on when it comes to that. And on the other side, our clinical side, we are really making some inroads and going out to the free clinics. We have a donor who's given us money to get a new piece of technology, an infractor on our van that will give us the opportunity to do more exams. And so we're pretty well into the second half of the year by looking at some great opportunities for our children programs, and more importantly, an additional government contract. So that's a lot to say. So I will step back and listen to the rest of the show.
Thank you, Tony. And CLB celebrates 123 years of programming this year, recently, May 17th. And thank you, Tony. Thank you, team, for all you listeners out there for the contributions that you have made through participating, through receiving services to attribute to CLB's continuum of direct services here in the Washington, D.C. region. I'm happy to welcome and introduce Denise Wyatt. This is her first time joining us on Where Are We Now? Denise is one of CLB's certified orientation and mobility specialists. And today, one of our focus areas is orientation and mobility. And Denise is here today to help unpack orientation and mobility. What exactly does that mean, and how is she able to meet the needs of our community? Denise, welcome.
Hi, Jocelyn. Thank you so much for having me. I haven't had the experience of being on your show yet, so I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. And you have been busy this year so far. You've been out in the schools, right, working with many youth, learning how to travel.
Yeah, that's right. I work in the school systems during the school year, and then I work with adults primarily during the summer. So yeah, it's really great. So what orientation and mobility is orientation basically is knowing where you are, and then mobility is knowing how to get where you want to go. So we work on travel skills, and that might mean learning how to use a white cane or learning how to get from point A to point B, crossing intersections, using public transportation, any of those things that may seem like a basic thing for sighted people. It's a whole special set of skills for people who are blind and visually impaired. So that's what I focus on.
Very important. As Tony was describing another program earlier in our episode, digital data scanning, teaching that training skill. As you know, whether it's going to your office, to your place of employment, or to school, having the know-how of safe travel is essential. So thank you for your skill set and for serving our community. As an instructor, a certified orientation and mobility specialist, through your years of teaching and serving youth and adults, is there a common misconception out there in the general public about orientation and mobility and how people who are blind or visually impaired, how we travel?
Yeah, there's one that I hear a lot, and that's the idea of getting a dog guide, commonly known as a seeing eye dog, which is also not a correct term. It's actually a brand name. But a lot of people think that if a person just gets a dog guide, that will solve all of their travel problems. The dog will just magically know how to get where the person wants to go, which is not how dog guides work. They are a fantastic partnership, but the person who is leading the team is telling the dog where to go. And so that person has to know where they are and where they are going. They're instructing the dog on the timing of things like crossing intersections. And so it's not something that will just solve a person's problem. And they have to have the cane skills first in order to get the dog. So there's a lot more involved in that. It's not just a fix-all that will solve all the problems.
Understood. Thank you for shedding light on that area for us. One of CLB's programs that I oversee and have the opportunity to train our volunteers is our volunteer one-on-one readers and visitors. They do an exceptional job of dedicating their time and their energy to serving our adults by helping them with their mail reading, visiting an errand to a grocery store or another place for a nominal commitment of 4 hours a month. Through the training, I give guidance on best practices of being a human guide. As a certified orientation mobility specialist, Denise, are there some tips out there that you would like to share with our listeners as they are out and about here in the DC marketplace or nationwide, globally, as they're listening and they recognize that someone could be blind or visually impaired and in need of assistance? How can they go about being a good Samaritan and being of service to that individual?
Sure. Of course, a lot of people want to help, and that is a great thing. But it's very important to remember that you don't want to just walk up to a person and grab them and pull them somewhere because you think that's where they want to go. The first thing you want to do is walk up to them and ask first if they need assistance. Just because you think it looks like they need assistance doesn't necessarily mean they do. And then second, if they do need assistance, they will take a hold of your arm, not the other way around. If they're just looking for directions, it's important to remember to use directional terms, specific terms like right, left, street names, building addresses, anything that's specific and not just pointing and saying that something is over there. So these are important tips to remember.
Denise, thank you. Seems so intuitive, but it is essential for us to take it upon ourselves to absorb that kind of information so that we can effectively and safely help our neighbors. Thank you, Denise, for your time and sharing those tips and your knowledge with us.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Now, along the theme of mobility, there are so many neat and useful technologies out there. One new technology that Tony, Denise, and I had the opportunity to explore and to meet firsthand earlier this year is a product of Eyes, a New York-based company that is really penetrating the Washington, D.C. market and the nation. And it's all around a technology and app that allows its users to travel safely as they're crossing different intersections, pedestrian safety. And it's really cool. Today we have the founder, CEO of this product, Michael, who comes to us from overseas, but he's now here in the nation, New York based. Michael, welcome.
Hey, Jocelyn, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us today. So what is this new technology? Can you help to shed light on it for us?
Yeah, sure, definitely. Maybe a short introduction. As you mentioned, I'm originally from Belgium, and the technology has been there for almost a year and a half. And we actually launched the technology about 4 months ago, and it was also indeed why we joined you guys in DC late February. But what our application is all about, and our app is called OKO, OKO, and it's a mobile app for iOS alone these days. But what we do is we use the smartphone back camera and artificial intelligence to interpret the pedestrian signal. And what that means is that we convey whether the signal is a walk phase, a don't walk phase, or a countdown phase. And in that sense, you can get access to any pedestrian signal as opposed to relying on physical infrastructure, because we visually interpret the light as, for example, a sighted person would do. And we bring that information back to the end user or the individual through 3 feedback mechanisms, of which is one of them an audio signal. The second one is a vibration or a haptic cue. And then a third one is a visual feedback, which makes it fairly easy to just explore DC or just generally all across the nation and feel more safe and more confident while crossing streets.
Wow, that is fascinating. That is amazing. It is a really positive use of AI, this artificial intelligence, which, we're hearing so often communicated out there in the media, and happy that it's being used to enrich the lives of our community, people who are blind or visually impaired.
Yeah, indeed. There's a lot of things going on the AI side of things. I think mostly, of course, these days are more on like language models with ChatGPT, but we're still focused on more the visual AI to interpret the world and translate that in any sort of feedback. But I think for all listeners, it's great to understand like that this technology has been validated for more than a year or so in Belgium, and we then just translated it to the US about 3-4 months ago. Pretty enthusiastic, and it's actually fascinating to tell as well that in those 4 months we've helped cross almost 200,000 intersections all over the US alone in those 4 months. And I think we have users in almost all states. I did the count, and it's like in 48 states already that our OKO app is being used to safely cross streets. A lot of people tell us that they're now offered with an audible signal just right there in their hand through their phone, as opposed to waiting for cities to install a physical audible light at every other intersection, which can take decades, of course. So that's pretty cool to have that AI background, of course, but do have a positive impact on a lot of lives here in the United States.
That's fantastic. Congratulations. Those are some high data points in a very condensed period of time.
Yeah, indeed. It's only the beginning for our startup as well. We're still young, and like I mentioned, we just moved our company here as of 1st of May. So it's been 8 or 9 weeks here in New York specifically. So I think there's a lot of things both on user growth and product growth that are still to come. And of course, with the advances in AI these days, there's even more cool and interesting stuff that will come to our Oko app anytime soon.
Michael, for listeners out there, how can they access this app? What do they need? Do they need a certain device? Is it available on Android and iPhone both?
Good question. Yeah. So currently we only focus on iPhone. The reason why we're, of course, a smaller startup, so there's limited resources and time. But on the other hand, which is way more important, the software is pretty complex. It's artificial intelligence, which requires a lot of computational power. And right now, that computational power only exists in current iPhones and not really in the Android phones. So that's why we initially focused on iOS devices. Of course, in addition to the fact that the largest portion in the market also are on iOS. But generally speaking, it's a free app that you can just download in the App Store, which you can find under Oko, AI Copilot for the Blind. And again, it's free, so you can just go about and download it, try it yourself, and see what the increase in safety, confidence, or independence might be for yourself. Because generally speaking, we don't want to charge the end user, because we always have the analogy, if a sighted person doesn't need to pay to look at a traffic light, nor should a blind or low vision pedestrian. And that's why we provide it for free and work more with governments or healthcare institutions.
Well, thank you. And your introduction of the app to our listeners, to our local community here on Where Are We Now is much appreciated.
Thank you for having me, Jocelyn. If anyone wants to reach out to us, they can always visit our website, which is ayes.ai.
Noted. Thank you.
My pleasure, Jocelyn.
Earlier this year, we welcomed a new advisory board member, Bob Irvin. Bob, welcome. And he is also a new consumer to Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind. And Bob, you have an amazing story predating your vision loss, but even now, the successes that you have attained through the training and again through your tenacity have really motivated and inspired our organization, our community. Another highlight, we recently hosted our first in-person advisory board meeting since March of 2020. And the testimonial that you shared was powerful. It was inspiring, so moving. And we thank you. And we are happy that you're joining us today on this latest episode of Where Are We Now? And to that, I am handing you access to sharing your story and how you came to Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind.
Well, thank you, Jocelyn, and thanks for having me this morning. I spent almost 40 years working as an environmental attorney and a conservation advocate. And the last 10 years of my career, I was the president and CEO of a national conservation organization, American Rivers. In 2021, I was preparing to retire. And I remember people would ask me, what are you going to do when you retire? And I said, well, I'm going to fly fish because I love to fly fish. I'm going to tie flies for fly fishing. I'm going to read some of the hundreds of books that I'd accumulated in my library over the years in anticipation of having the time to read them someday. And I wanted to travel with my wife, Nancy. So I was looking forward to doing all of those things. 3 months into retirement, I experienced a rare condition. The long name is non-arteritic anterior ischemic optic neuropathy. The acronym is NION. And what it is basically is that the blood flow to the optic nerve gets shut off during the night while you're sleeping, and it kills cells in the optic nerve, which is the connection between your eye and your brain. And so when you sever that connection, your brain can no longer register the images and you lose the vision. So I lost most of the vision in my left eye, but I still had vision in my right eye. And with some adjustment, I was able to, continue life relatively normally. But I knew from my doctors that there was a 1 in 5 chance that it could happen in my other eye. Being the optimist that I am, I thought, well, that means that there's a 4 in 5 chance that it won't happen. And so I basically didn't worry a whole lot about it. I was in the back of my mind, but I just kind of went on with my life. Well, 10 months later, it did happen again in my right eye. And I lost probably 75% of the vision in my right eye. And so I became legally blind with low vision. And when this happened, Nancy and I were devastated. We did not know how we were going to manage, quite frankly, because suddenly I couldn't drive, I couldn't read printed material, I couldn't use a computer, I couldn't do all of the things that I normally could do. And a lot of that burden fell immediately on Nancy. And so it was quite stressful and depressing for both of us. But Nancy started looking around immediately for places that could help. And my father, who's a retired vocational rehabilitation counselor in Kentucky, mentioned the Lighthouse for the Blind, and several other people, including my sister, mentioned it as well. And so that was one of the places that Nancy reached out to by email. And the Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind, CLB, was the first place to respond. It was less than a week that she heard back from them. And then we received a call from Sean Calloway at CLB, who had been assigned to be my counselor. And, he asked me what my condition was and what I needed, what I wanted to do. And, I didn't know what I needed other than I needed some help and reassurance. And Sean immediately provided that because he is blind himself. And he was talking to me on the phone and I could hear his kids in the background and he was working on the computer. And it was clear to me that he was leading, a pretty normal life. And I remember what he said to me that day. He said, "You will be able to lead a good life." And those words were so reassuring to me. And one of the things I told Sean that I missed immediately was being able to read the daily newspaper and feel connected to what was going on in the world and to be able to talk with my friends and family about those events. And he said, "Oh, no problem." And he got me signed up for the National Federation of the Blind's Newsline service so that I was able to use my Amazon devices or my phone and listen to the New York Times and the Washington Post and about 300 other publications immediately. And that was huge in making me feel like, okay, there are ways to navigate this new world I'm in and to just be connected again. And I told Sean I was ready to undertake whatever training was available, eager to do that. And about a week later, he called and said that there was an opening in the Foundational Adjustment to Blindness, FAB course that CLB runs. It's a week-long course to teach you some of the basic skills for navigating being blind. Things like how to pour hot liquids into your mug without spilling them or burning yourself, how to use a microwave, basic mobility training. And so I jumped at that opportunity, was in a class led by Annie Presley at CLB. And it was terrific, not only in learning some basic skills that were really useful, but also in being in a class with 3 other individuals who were newly blind and who were going through a lot of the same emotional adjustments that I was making and that Nancy was making. Just knowing that there were other people that were dealing with this and were figuring out ways to get through it was really, really helpful. And just one little story about that class. One day, Annie was showing us how to thread a sewing needle. And I remember thinking that this was interesting, but I don't sew and it wasn't going to be particularly useful to me. And then she pulled out a dental floss threader and showed us how you could use that to thread a needle. And suddenly the light bulb went on in my brain and I realized that I could use that dental floss threader to tie a fishing line onto the tiny fishing flies that I use for fly fishing. And so there was an immediate excitement there for me because this was something that I could really use in something that I love doing. And after the FAB class, Annie helped me get registered for the National Library Services, which is through the Library of Congress, to get audiobooks. So suddenly I was able to listen to books, many of which I had in print already, and I was able to start rebuilding my library as an audio library so I could listen to those books. And a month or so later, I had mobility training with Annie through CLB, and I did that not because I needed it on a day-to-day basis, because I do have low vision and am able to navigate reasonably well on my own, at least in familiar situations. But I knew from my experience that you never know. And if I lose the rest of my vision in my right eye, I was going to need to be able to get around using a white cane. In addition, in unfamiliar and crowded situations, I thought having that training would be very useful. And it was, and it has been. And not only did I learn to use the white cane, but I learned to navigate Washington's metro subway system and found that very useful as well. Remember what I said at the outset about how when I was asked what I was going to do in retirement, I said I was going to fly fish, I was going to tie flies, I was going to read books, I was going to travel with my wife, Nancy. Well, as a result of the training from CLB, I have developed both the skills and the confidence that I'm able to do all four of those things. I was recently fortunate to spend a week in Montana with Nancy and our son and daughter-in-law. My son and I had some great time fly fishing in Montana. I've been tying flies. In fact, I'm tying some flies right now for my son's birthday for him to use in fly fishing. I've been reading books regularly, and I basically have recreated my library as a list of audiobooks that I can access through the National Library Service and other services. And Nancy and I have been traveling a lot to Montana and Colorado. We just got back from New York, and we're getting ready to go on another trip to Vermont starting this weekend. And I'm able to do those things because of the services that CLB provided to me. And I realize how fortunate I am because, I'm retired. I had a good career and have been able to enjoy some success in life. But becoming blind was the biggest challenge I've ever faced. And being able to have the resources of CLB to help me has just been critical to my ability to adjust to blindness and be able to thrive in my life. One of the things I wanted to do was to pay it forward. And so I asked if I could meet with Tony Cancelosi, CLB's CEO, because I thought that maybe as a retired CEO, I might be able to be useful to him in some way and useful to the organization. So I called Tony and we had a great conversation. And I said, how can I help? Anything that I can do. And we talked about things that would be helpful for me to do. And he invited me to join the Community Advisory Board. And I was thrilled to be invited to do that and pleased to accept the invitation because helping this tremendous organization to be able to do even more, to provide even more services to the blind and low vision community is a critically important mission. And to be able to help Tony and his dedicated staff continue and expand the great work that CLB does is something that I very much want to be part of. And so I can't thank CLB enough for all of the work that it does for the blind and low vision community and what it has done for me personally. I'm thrilled to have this opportunity to share that story with all of you.
Well, Bob, thank you for sharing your story. Such a powerful story it is, and a heartfelt congratulations to you for your successes. And you are clearly living out CLB's mission. You have overcome the challenge of your vision loss. You are remaining productive and active in your life, in the community, and you have adapted well. And I echo your sentiment of gratitude to our team, our staff, for their ability to train and to relate to our consumers, to give them the confidence and the skill sets needed to achieve their goals for whatever life stage they're in. And you communicated it very well, and we thank you.
Well, thank you. And I realize that I actually left out one critical part. And if I can just, for a brief moment, say, in addition to all the other training, CLB gave me the opportunity to have training with a wonderful instructor, Libra Robinson, on how to use my smartphone and how to use JAWS on my computer to regain the skills I have there. And as a result of that amazing training that Libra did, I'm able to use my phone and a computer as effectively as I could before I lost my vision. And indeed, the fact that I am on this call and able to provide this testimony and have it recorded is a result of that training. So again, CLB has just been a true lifeline for both me and my wife, Nancy.
Thank you, Bob, so much. Thank you to your family, to your dad and his legacy as a member of the industry of professionals who train people who are blind or visually impaired. It's an amazing full circle story there.
It is. My dad, he still works at age 87. So I'm glad that he was able to provide such an important referral for CLB.
Thank you. Listeners out there, if you are interested in getting connected to CLB for services, if you are inspired to volunteer your time or to contribute in other ways, please reach out. We're available online at clb.org and give us a call, 202-454-6400. Email info@clb.org, and we are also reachable via social media. To all of our participants today on this episode, thank you so much for your time in sharing. Tony, Denise, Michael, and Bob, I thank you all. This has been Where Are We Now?, the summer edition of 2023.